Have you ever stood in front of a mirror long enough that the person staring back at you started to look like a stranger? Not because you didn't recognize your own face, but because the face staring back at you didn't match the dreams you once carried in your chest. I want you to imagine something with me right now. Imagine you're standing in front of that mirror. The bathroom light is flickering the way they always do in apartments that have seen better decades. You lift your hand to touch your temple, and there they are, gray hairs you don't remember growing. When did they arrive? Was it last year? Last month? Or did they appear the very moment you finally stopped running and realized you were alone? Now imagine that behind you, in the next room, there is no one calling your name. No child asking for breakfast. No husband wondering where his shirt is. Just silence. The kind of silence that echoes off walls that have heard your weeping more than your laughter. That was Naoma's life. And I'm telling you her story today because somewhere in the middle of your scrolling, your searching, you're wondering if God still sees the woman buried under years of sacrifice. Naoma's story is your invitation to stop looking at the mirror and start looking at the harvest. I want to share a personal experience with you. Not because my story matters more than yours, but because I need you to understand that I know what it feels like to watch your youth evaporate while you pour yourself into everyone else's future. Years ago, I had an aunt, Auntie Ngozi we called her. She was the most beautiful woman in our village. I mean, the kind of beautiful that made men write songs. She had dreams of becoming a nurse, of traveling to England, of wearing white uniforms with caps that sat like crowns on her head. But when her father passed, she became the one who held the family together. She worked at the market, selling cassava. She worked at the primary school as a teacher's aide. She worked at night sewing clothes for the women in the church. Every kobo she earned went to her younger brothers. School fees, books, uniforms. When one brother wanted to travel to Lagos for work, she sold her gold earrings, the only inheritance her mother left her, to buy his ticket. And do you know what happened? The brothers got successful. They built houses with iron sheets. They bought cars that made noise when they drove past. They had children who called them daddy and uncle, but never remembered her name when it was time for Christmas visits. Auntie Ngozi stayed in that same room with the zinc roof that rattled when it rained. She wore the same wrapper until it faded from blue to gray. And one day, I walked into her room and found her staring at a photograph of herself at 17, standing straight, smiling like the sun was her personal property. And she whispered to me, "Chidima, where did the years go?" I blinked, and they were gone. That moment never left me. So when I tell you that I understand the ache of feeling like your life was spent as a ladder for others to climb, believe me, I know. I know the bitterness that rises in your throat when you see the people you sacrificed for driving past you without slowing down. I know the shame that wraps itself around your shoulders when you calculate your age against your accomplishments and come up empty. But here's what I also know, and this is why you must stay with me until the very end of this story. What you think are wasted years are actually warehouse years. God has been storing up your harvest in a place that inflation cannot touch, that fire cannot burn, that thieves cannot break in and steal. Every tear you cried while smiling at someone else's wedding, stored. Every night you went to bed hungry so your brother could eat, stored. Every dream you set on the altar so someone else could pursue theirs, compounding with interest in a heavenly account that is about to be wired directly into your hands. But we need to talk about Naoma. 25 years ago, Naoma was the star of her family. If you had gone to her village in Enugu State and asked anyone, who is the one destined for greatness, they would have pointed at her without hesitation. She had the grades, she had the face, she had the fire in her belly that made you know she was going to do something remarkable. Her dream was to become a fashion designer. Not just any designer, but the kind who would dress the first lady, whose name would be spoken in Lagos drawing rooms,
whose clothes would be photographed for magazines that smelled like expensive perfume. She had sketches, hundreds of them. Sketches she drew on the margins of her school notebooks, on the back of old receipts, on any surface that would hold ink. Her designs were not ordinary. They told stories. Each dress was a poem. Each blouse was a prayer. But life, as it often does, had a different first chapter for Neoma. Her father, a respected teacher in the community, collapsed one afternoon while walking home from the school where he had taught for 30 years. By the time they got him to the hospital, he was gone. Heart failure, the doctor said. Nothing anyone could have done. Neoma was 23 years old, and just like that, she went from being the star to being the bank. Her mother was a trader who sold vegetables at the market, but the grief had stolen her strength. The younger brothers, 3 of them, each more ambitious than the last, needed school fees. The youngest, Chukudi, had just been offered admission to study engineering in Lagos. The fees were enormous. The family looked at Neoma. She never said no. She worked 3 jobs. 3! In the morning, she sold fried yams by the roadside. In the afternoon, she worked as a seamstress in a shop where the owner paid her pennies for work that should have earned pounds. In the evening, she cleaned the homes of wealthy women who never looked her in the eye.
She wore 1 pair of shoes for 4 years. Let me say that again. 4 years, 1 pair of shoes. She would patch them with rubber cut from old tires when the soles wore through. She would walk in the rain with plastic bags wrapped around her feet so the water wouldn't ruin them. She did this so Chukudi could walk into his university halls in London with new shoes on his feet. She sent money for his books. She sent money for his rent. When he called to say his flight was booked and he needed the fare, she sold the sewing machine her mother had given her, the only thing of value she owned, and wired the money before the bank closed. She was the ladder everyone climbed to reach the top. And here's the part that breaks my heart. Once they got there, they pulled the ladder up behind them. Chukudi finished his studies. He got a job at a big engineering firm in London. He bought a house with a garden and a car that started with the push of a button. His calls became shorter. Then they became less frequent. Then they stopped coming at all. The nieces she raised, her brother's daughters who stayed with her when their mother was sick, moved to the city for work. They promised to call. They promised to visit. But the city has a way of making people forget the hands that carried them when they were too small to walk. At 50, Neoma was alone, tired, broke, and the enemy, that whisperer of lies, took his seat beside her every night. You wasted your life. Nobody remembers you, not even God. It was 2023, the year the country's economy seemed to collapse like a house built on sand. Inflation wasn't just a word on the news, it was a presence that sat at every meal, demanding to be fed with money that no longer existed. Neoma's small petty trading business, the one she had started with the last of her savings, selling fabrics she bought from the market and reselling to women in the village, collapsed like a dying star. The fabrics became too expensive to buy. The women stopped coming. The shelves that once held bright colors now held only dust and disappointment. She sat on the floor of her one-room apartment, the same apartment she had rented for 15 years because she never had enough to move anywhere better. The paint was peeling. The window had a crack that let in the cold air during Harmattan. The mattress she slept on had springs that poked through the fabric like the fingers of a dead man. And she cried. Not the quiet tears of a woman who has learned to hide her pain. No, these were the cries of a woman whose heart had finally split open from the weight of decades. She sobbed until her throat was raw. She beat the floor with her fists. She looked up at the ceiling, at the water stains that looked like maps of countries she would never visit, and screamed at the heavens. Lord, is this how it ends? I gave everything to people, my youth, my strength, my dreams, and now I am a beggar sitting on a floor that belongs to someone else. Are my years truly wasted? Did you see me? Did you watch me pour out my life and decide to look away? Her voice cracked on the last words.
She lay down on the floor, her cheek pressed against the cold cement, and she waited for an answer that she was certain would never come. But God is not a man that he should lie, and he had not been sleeping. That night, Naoma had a dream. Not the kind of dream where you chase something you can never catch or fall from a height that has no bottom. This was different. This was a dream that came wrapped in light so thick she could feel it on her skin like oil. She found herself standing in a vast, dry desert. The sand stretched in every direction, endless and empty. The sun was high, and the heat made the air shimmer. There was no water, no tree, no sign of life anywhere. But as she walked, her feet leaving prints in the sand that immediately filled in behind her, she noticed something strange. Everywhere she looked, there were seeds. Not seeds scattered randomly, but seeds arranged in patterns. She bent down to look at one, and as she touched it, the seed became a memory. She saw herself at 23, crying as she handed her father's coffin to the earth. A tear fell from her eye into the sand, and there, right there, a seed appeared. She walked further. She saw another seed. She touched it, and the memory played like a film before her eyes. She was 30, standing in the rain, holding her uncle's umbrella over his head while he walked to his examination hall. Her own clothes were soaked through. She was shivering, but she was smiling because he looked back at her with hope in his eyes. Another tear, another seed. She began to run through the desert, touching seeds, watching memories unfold. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal she had skipped, every dream she had buried when no one was watching. They were all there, not lost, not wasted, planted in the sand like crops waiting for their season. Then a wind began to blow from the east. It started as a whisper, the kind of wind that makes you turn your head and listen. But it grew. It became a force, a rushing, a roar. The sand began to shift. The seeds that had been buried began to rise. And in seconds, literally seconds, the desert turned green. Naoma watched as grass sprouted from the sand, as trees shot up from the earth, as flowers opened their petals to a sun that suddenly seemed kinder. Where there had been emptiness, there was now a garden so lush, so abundant, she could smell the sweetness of it in the air. An angel appeared beside her, not a creature with wings and a halo like the paintings in church, but a presence so solid, so real, that she felt her knees buckle under the weight of his glory. He pointed to jars, jars lined up in rows that stretched beyond what her eyes could see. Each jar was filled to the brim with something that glittered like gold mixed with light. These, the angel said, are the sacrifices men ignored, the nights they forgot, the years they counted as nothing. But in heaven they have been accruing interest. Every tear was a deposit, every prayer was a transaction. God does not owe any man. He is not a debtor, but he is a father who honors his children. The angel turned to look at her, and his eyes were filled with something she had never seen in the eyes of any human: pure, unbroken love. The years the locusts ate were not wasted, he said. They were invested in the secret place, and now, Naoma, it is harvest time. She woke up gasping. The clock on her wall said 6 a.m., the same clock that had been ticking for 15 years, its hands always pointing to a time that felt like too late. But something was different.
Naoma sat up on her mattress, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of disappointment pressing on her chest. She felt something she couldn't name, something that made her heart beat faster, that made her look toward her door as if expecting it to open. Then came the knock, not a gentle tap, a loud, urgent banging that made her jump. 3 hard pounds against the wooden door that separated her from the world. Her heart jumped into her throat. Was it the landlord? She was behind on rent, 3 months now. Was it more trouble? Another bill she couldn't pay? Another mouth asking her for something she didn't have? She walked to the door slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for the latch. She opened it, and there stood a man in a sharp charcoal suit,
the kind of suit that costs more than she had earned in the last 5 years. His shoes were polished to a shine that reflected the morning light. Behind him stood 2 security guards, tall and silent, their eyes scanning the street as if protecting someone important. The man looked familiar, but the years had changed him. He was no longer the lanky boy who had left for London with her money in his pocket. He was a man now, a powerful man, a man who had eaten from the tree of success and forgotten the hand that planted it. It was Chukwudi. He didn't walk in. He didn't ask for water or a seat or any of the courtesies that men of his status usually demand. He fell to his knees, right there in the dirt outside her one-room apartment. The charcoal suit that cost more than her entire neighborhood pressed into the red earth. The security guards looked at each other, confused, but they didn't move to stop him. He wept. Not the controlled tears of a man who has learned to perform emotion. These were the sobs of a man whose heart had been broken open by the hand of God. "Sister," he cried, his shoulders heaving, "I was blinded by success. I was lost in the world. I built my empire, and in building it, I buried the memory of the woman who made it possible." He looked up at her, and his eyes were red with weeping. "3 nights ago, I couldn't sleep. I tried everything. I took pills. I drank wine. I walked through my house in London, counting the rooms, counting the things I owned. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw your face. I saw the shoes you wore for me. I saw the meals you skipped. I saw you standing in the rain with your umbrella over my head while your own clothes were soaked." He grabbed her hand. His fingers, which had signed contracts worth millions, wrapped around her calloused fingers. "God wouldn't let me breathe until I found you. I have been searching for 3 days. I called everyone. I flew back last night. I couldn't wait until morning. I had to find you. I had to kneel at your feet and beg for your forgiveness." Neoma stood there, frozen. The morning light fell on her face, and for a moment she didn't know if she was still dreaming. She looked down at her brother, this man who had become a stranger, and she felt something shift in her chest, something she thought had died years ago. She reached down and touched his head. Her hand, rough from years of labor, rested on his hair that had been cut by the finest barbers in London. "Get up," she whispered. "Get up, my brother." But Chukwudi didn't just come back with an apology. He came back with something that made Neoma's knees buckle again, not from grief this time, but from the sheer weight of what he placed in her hands. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 things. The first was a set of keys, not the ordinary keys that open doors in a one-room apartment. These were heavy keys with a logo she recognized, the symbol of the most prestigious estate in Lagos. The kind of estate where governors live, where celebrities have homes with swimming pools, where the gates are guarded by men with guns who only open for names that matter. The second was an envelope, heavy, embossed, the kind of envelope that lawyers use when they are transferring something that can change a life. Chukwudi's voice was trembling as he spoke. "Sister, I am the CEO of a global textile firm now. The company you heard about, the one that supplies fabrics to designers across 3 continents, that is mine. But here is what I realized when God woke me up in the middle of the night. The foundation of my company was not my degree. It was not my talent. It was not my connections." He paused, his eyes filling with tears again. "The foundation of my company was your sacrifice. Every kobo you sent me, every night you stayed awake sewing while I slept, every meal you gave me while I ate nothing, that is the capital that built my empire." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "I have transferred 20% of the company's shares into your name. You are now a part owner of an enterprise worth more than you can imagine. The dividends alone will be more than you earned in all the years you spent selling fabrics." He pointed to the keys. "And that house you always dreamed of, the one with the big garden, the one where you used to tell me you would one day set up your sewing machines under the mango tree, it's waiting for you. I bought it 3 years ago, but I didn't know why. I just felt compelled to own it. Now I know. It was always yours." Neoma looked at the keys, She looked at the envelope. She looked at her brother, who was still kneeling on her floor because she hadn't told him to get up again. And she laughed. It was not the laughter of a woman who has gone mad. It was the laughter of a woman whose heart was being stretched beyond its capacity to hold joy. It was the sound of chains breaking. It was the sound of the locusts fleeing. It was the sound of harvest arriving at her doorstep after 30 years of waiting. But here is what I want you to understand, and I need you to lean in close because this is the part that matters more than the money or the house. The miracle was not just the money. God began to restore her time. The health she thought she had lost to stress, the constant headaches, the pain in her back from bending over the sewing machine, the fatigue that had become her constant companion began to lift. She didn't understand it. She hadn't started any new medicine. She hadn't changed her diet. But something had shifted in the spiritual realm, and her body was responding to it. The beauty she thought had faded, the skin that had been weathered by years of standing in the sun selling fabrics, the hands that had been roughened by labor, the face that had been etched with lines of worry, began to glow. Women in her new neighborhood would stop her in the street and ask, "What cream are you using? What is your secret?"
She would smile and say, "Heavenly oil." Because that's what it was. Not something she bought from a store, but something that had been poured over her by the same God who had been watching her all those years, waiting for the moment when he could publicly vindicate her. Naomi did not do what most people would have done with sudden wealth. She did not buy a fleet of cars. She did not travel to Dubai to shop. She did not build a mansion with pillars and gates that would make her neighbors jealous. She built something that would outlast her. She used her wealth to open the Restoration Academy. It was a school specifically for women who had missed their chance at education, women who had dropped out of school to take care of younger siblings, women who had never learned to read because their families needed them to work, women who had spent their youth raising children that were not their own and had nothing to show for it. The academy was not a charity. Naomi refused to call it that. "This is not charity," she told the first class of 50 women who sat before her, their eyes filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "This is restoration. You are not receiving a gift. You are collecting what has been owed to you by a God who does not forget." She taught them to sew. She taught them to read. She taught them to run businesses. But more than anything, she taught them that their years were not wasted. Every diaper they had changed, every meal they had cooked for someone else's children, every night they had stayed awake worrying about the needs of others, it was all seed. And seed, she told them, does not disappear. It waits. It grows. It multiplies. Within 3 years, the Restoration Academy had produced over 500 graduates. Women who had been dismissed as village girls were now running their own tailoring shops, supplying fabrics to markets across the state, sending their own children to universities. The academy had branches in 3 cities. Government officials came to tour it. Newspapers wrote stories about the woman who turned tears into textiles. But Naomi was not done. Because the years the locusts had eaten were not just being given back, they were being multiplied. 1 year of her new life, she discovered, was worth 10 years of her old struggle. Everything she did prospered. Every business she touched turned to gold. Every woman she trained became a success story that inspired 100 more. She was not just restored, she was multiplied. On her 60th birthday, Naomi stood before a crowd that she could never have imagined in her wildest dreams. She was in Lagos, at the convention center, where a global summit on women's leadership was being held. The lights were bright, the cameras were everywhere. And there she was, Naomi, the woman who once sat on a cold floor in a one-room apartment, crying out to a God she thought had forgotten her. She was wearing a dress of her own design.
It was made from fabric that she had woven herself, using techniques she had learned in those wasted years when she was sewing for others while dreaming of her own greatness. The dress was magnificent. It told a story in every thread, a story of suffering that became beauty, of tears that became jewels, of a desert that became a garden. When she stepped to the podium, the crowd fell silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, powerful faces, wealthy faces, faces that had never known what it was like to count pennies for bread, and she smiled. "I used to think I was late," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I used to look at my age and feel a panic in my chest. I used to calculate the years I had spent serving others and add them up as losses. I used to think that God had forgotten me, that my time had passed, that my chance at a meaningful life was over before it had begun." She paused, and you could have heard a pin drop in that room. "But I serve a God who is the master of the clock. He does not measure time the way we do. He does not count years the way we count them. What the world calls too late, He calls the appointed time. What the world calls wasted, He calls invested. What the world calls forgotten, He calls reserved." She lifted her hands, and the light caught the gold bracelets she wore, bracelets that had been her mother's, the only inheritance she had kept through all the years of poverty. "He took my wasted years and turned them into a waiting period. He made me wait because the harvest I was about to receive was too heavy for my youth to carry. He made me wait because He was preparing not just a blessing, but a platform. He made me wait because He wanted the world to see that what He does in His perfect time." The crowd rose to their feet. They clapped, they cheered, but Naomi was not looking at them. She was looking at the ceiling, at the light fixtures that seemed to her like stars, and she was whispering to the God who had never left her. "I see it now. I understand it now. You were not late. You were right on time." But the restoration did not stop at her bank account, or her house, or her academy. God went deeper. He went into the place that had been most damaged by 30 years of selfless sacrifice, her identity. For decades, Naomi was not a person, she was a function. She was Chikudi's sister. She was the woman who helps. She was auntie to 100 children who called her name only when they needed something. She had no name of her own, no identity that was separate from what she did for others. And that, more than the poverty, more than the loneliness, had been the deepest wound of all. One afternoon, about a year after her restoration began, Naomi was sitting in her new garden. The mango tree that Chikudi remembered from her childhood dreams was there, its branches heavy with fruit. She was sitting under it, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the butterflies move from flower to flower. A woman walked up to the gate. She was young, perhaps 30, dressed in clothes that spoke of a successful career. She was holding something in her hands, something wrapped in tissue paper carefully as if it were precious. The security guard approached her, but Naomi waved him away. There was something about this woman that made her heart beat faster. The woman walked through the garden, and when she reached Naomi, she fell to her knees. Not the dramatic fall of a supplicant, but the gentle lowering of a daughter before a mother. "Auntie," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't remember you. I was just a child when you last saw me, but I have spent my entire adult life searching for you." She unwrapped the tissue paper, and Naomi's breath caught in her throat. It was a dress, a tattered hand-sewn dress that had been washed so many times the fabric was soft as air. The stitching was uneven in places, the stitching of a young woman who was still learning her craft. But there was something about the dress that made Naomi's eyes fill with tears she didn't understand. "My mother was your neighbor. You remember her? The woman with 3 children whose husband left her with nothing." Neoma searched her memory, and then it came to her. A young widow, struggling to feed her children. A daughter who was supposed to attend a wedding but had no dress to wear. "I made that dress for you 30 years ago," Neoma said, her voice whispering. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "This dress was the only beautiful thing I owned during the hardest years of my life. When my mother died, I kept it. When I was homeless, I carried it with me. When I wanted to give up, I would hold it and remember that there was once a woman who gave me beauty when I had nothing."
She looked up at Neoma with eyes that held a lifetime of gratitude. "I am now the editor of a major fashion magazine, and I have spent 5 years trying to find the woman who stitched hope into these seams. I searched through villages. I asked everyone. I never stopped believing that I would find you." She reached out and took Neoma's hand. "You are not just a woman who sewed a dress. You are the reason I believed that beauty could exist in a broken world. You are the reason I became who I am." Neoma sat there, under the mango tree, with a tattered dress in her hands and a woman at her feet, and she understood for the first time what the angel had meant. Her years were not wasted. They were seeds. And the harvest was not just for her, it was for everyone she had touched. Within a month of that encounter, Neoma's life changed again. The fashion editor, her name was Adana, did not just thank Neoma and leave. She wrote a feature about her, a long, detailed feature with photographs of the tattered dress, of Neoma's old sketches, of the Restoration Academy. She called it "The Woman Who Stitched Hope." The article went viral. Suddenly, Neoma's old designs, the ones she thought were outdated, the ones she had buried in boxes under her bed, the ones she had made during those wasted years when she was sewing for others while dreaming of her own greatness, became the talk of the fashion world. Designers wanted to collaborate with her. Museums wanted to exhibit her work. Young women who had never heard of her began to wear clothes inspired by her sketches. The world, it turned out, was tired of fast fashion, tired of clothes that had no story, no soul, no connection to the hands that made them. They wanted what Neoma had been creating all along, garments that carried meaning, that whispered of sacrifice and love, that wrapped the wearer in a story bigger than themselves. Her wasted years, she realized, were not a gap in her resume. They were her secret apprenticeship. While she was serving others, God was teaching her patience, teaching her precision, teaching her empathy, teaching her the things that no university could provide, no degree could certify, no job interview could verify. The magazines did not call her a newcomer or a late bloomer. They called her what she truly was, a vindicated legend. And here is the greatest part of Neoma's story. The part that makes me weep every time I think about it. She did not become bitter. When those who had abandoned her saw her glory and came crawling back, and they did come back, believe me, she did not shut the door. She did not give them the cold shoulder. She did not remind them of the years they had forgotten her. She sat them down and fed them. She opened her home to the nieces who had moved to the city and forgotten her number. She welcomed the neighbors who had used her as a warning to their daughters. She forgave everyone who had taken from her without giving back. She showed them that the God of restoration does not just give you back your stuff, He gives you back your heart. The bitterness she had carried, the resentment she didn't even know she was holding against Chukuri, the anger at the years she never got to go to parties or wear pretty dresses or be young and carefree, simply melted away. Not because she was strong enough to let it go, but because God reached into her soul and pulled out the sting of those memories. He replaced the spirit of heaviness with a garment of praise. She walked out of that old room, the one-room apartment where she had spent 15 years, and suddenly she didn't feel 50 or 60. She felt brand new. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled, her step was light.
People began to ask her, "Auntie, what is your secret? You are growing younger while we are growing older." And she would smile and say, "I have learned that the locusts didn't actually eat my years. They only hid the harvest until I was strong enough to manage it." But the final act of Neoma's restoration was bigger than her success. It was about the repayment of her tears. For years, the people in her village had used Neoma as a warning. They would point at her and tell their daughters, "Don't be like her. Look at how she helped everyone and ended up with nothing. Look at how she gave and ended up alone and broke." They used her life as a reason to be selfish, a reason to hold back, a reason to say, "I will not make the same mistake." But God said, "I will use her life to prove that mercy is the greatest investment." On the day she was to be crowned as a national matriarch of industry, a ceremony attended by dignitaries from across the continent, a surprise guest was brought to the stage. He was an old man, bent with age, his skin wrinkled like dried leather. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, helped by two young men who looked like they might be his grandsons. The crowd murmured, wondering who this old man was and why he was being brought to the stage at such an important event. His name was Pa Obina, and he was the very first person Neoma had ever helped. When she was just 19 years old, a girl with dreams too big for her village and only 2 coins to her name, she had found Pa Obina lying outside the clinic, unable to pay for the medicine that would save his life. She had given her 2 coins. She had walked away with nothing, but she had walked away knowing that a man would live because of her. Pa Obina did not come to say thank you. He came to show the world what Neoma's 2 coins had become. He told the crowd, his voice weak but clear, that because she had saved his life, he had been able to raise his children. Because he had raised his children, one of them became a teacher. That teacher started a scholarship fund in Pa Obina's name. That scholarship fund educated over 500 orphans. 500 orphans. Those orphans became doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, farmers. They built families, started businesses, transformed communities, all because a 19-year-old girl with 2 coins had refused to walk past a dying man. As Pa Obina finished his story, something remarkable happened. 500 people in the audience stood up. They stood up one by one from different sections of the hall, from different walks of life. Some were in suits, some were in traditional attire. Some were young, some were old, but they all had one thing in common. One by one, they began to shout, "I am a doctor because of Auntie Neoma's 2 coins. I am a pilot because of her sacrifice. I am a mother because she saved my grandfather. I am a teacher because she gave when she had nothing." The shouts filled the hall, echoing off the walls, rising to the ceiling like a chorus of angels. The cameras captured it all. The dignitaries sat in stunned silence. The organizers of the event, who had planned every moment, had not planned for this. Neoma stood on the stage trembling. She thought she had been wasting her time in a small village, sewing dresses for pennies, skipping meals to feed her brothers, sleeping on a mattress with springs that poked through. She thought her life had been a series of small, insignificant acts that no one noticed and no one remembered. But in the spiritual realm, in the realm that matters more than what cameras can capture, she had been building a dynasty of grace.
The years weren't eaten. They were multiplying in the lives of people she didn't even know. Every seed she had planted had grown into a tree. Every tree had produced fruit, and that fruit had produced seeds that had spread across the continent, across generations, across time. But there was one more piece of Neoma's restoration, the piece that would complete the picture. For a long time, people thought the Neoma line would end with her. Because she had spent her childbearing years raising other people's children, the world whispered that she would never have a seed of her own. They called her a foster mother to the world, but a mother to none. She had accepted this. She had made peace with it. She had told herself that the women she trained, the students she taught, the children she helped raise, they were her legacy. And they were. But God, who remembered Sarah at 90 and Hannah in her tears, had one more surprise hidden in the pages of time. One day, a young woman walked into Naoma's fashion house. She was tall, graceful, with eyes that held a fire Naoma recognized immediately. She was not looking for a job. She was carrying a small wooden box, the kind of box that people in the village used to keep precious things, the things that cannot be replaced. She asked to see Naoma in private. When they were alone, she opened the box. Inside was a piece of fabric, the very first piece of fabric Naoma had ever woven as a young girl, a piece she had given to a man she had loved, a man she had lost to a tragic accident 32 years ago. And there was a photograph, the man she had loved, the man who had died before they could marry, before they could have the life they had dreamed of together. The young woman looked at Naoma with eyes that were a mirror of Naoma's own. "My mother died when I was born," she whispered. "She was the sister of the man you loved. When he died, she raised me. But before she died, she gave me this box. She told me that the man who loved her sister had a woman named Naoma, who sacrificed her life for her family. She told me to find you, because you are the only home I have left in this world." She knelt before Naoma. "I am not your daughter by blood, but I am the daughter of the man you loved, and I have come to be your daughter if you will have me." Naoma looked at the young woman. She looked at the fabric. She looked at the man she had buried in her heart 32 years ago. And in that moment, the locust of loneliness was officially executed. God did not just give Naoma a niece, He gave her a daughter who carried her talent, her face, her spirit, a daughter who would carry her name into generations that Naoma would not live to see. The years she spent mothering Chukwudi and the others were not instead of having a child. They were the training she needed to become the matriarch of a brand new dynasty. The young woman's name was Grace, and Grace brought something to Naoma's life that Naoma didn't know she was missing, a modern edge to her traditional wisdom. Grace had grown up in the city. She understood technology, social media, the way the world was moving. She took Naoma's designs, the timeless, soulful designs that had been brewing in her heart for 30 years, and put them on platforms that Naoma had never heard of. Together, they took Naoma's legacy to the runways of Paris, New York, and Tokyo. The woman who used to count pennies to buy a loaf of bread was now being interviewed by the biggest news networks in the world. Her face was on magazine covers. Her name was spoken in the same breath as the greatest designers of her generation. And every time they asked her, "How did you do it? How did you go from a one-room apartment to the runways of Paris?" she would point to the sky and say, "I didn't do it. I just stayed in the queue. I waited until the master of the vineyard decided it was my turn to be paid. And let me tell you, he pays with heavy interest." She would laugh that laugh, the laugh that once was buried under years of grief, and the interviewers would laugh with her, though they didn't fully understand. They couldn't understand. They hadn't sat on a cold floor at 3 a.m. crying out to a God they thought had forgotten them. They hadn't felt the weight of 30 years of sacrifice pressing down on their chests like a stone. But Naoma understood. And every time she told her story, someone in the audience would feel something shift in their own heart. Someone would realize that their years were not wasted. Someone would stop looking at the mirror and start looking at the harvest. I am talking to someone today who feels like they are behind in life.
You look at your age, maybe you're 30, maybe you're 40, maybe you're 50 or 60 or 70, and you feel a panic in your chest. You see the years stretching behind you, filled with sacrifice and service and giving, and you look at your hands, and they seem empty. You look at the people you helped, the siblings you supported, the children you raised, the friends you carried through their darkest hours, and they are doing better than you. They have the houses, the cars, the families, the success, and you feel a sting of bitterness that you are ashamed to admit even to yourself. Listen to me. Your labor is a seed. It is not a loss. Every sleepless night, every meal you skipped, every dream you set aside so someone else could pursue theirs, it is all seed, and seed does not disappear. It waits in the ground, unseen by everyone except the God who planted it with you. And God, He is an expert at the 11th hour miracle. He is about to compress 20 years of blessings into 20 months of manifestation. The people who forgot you, the ones who climbed the ladder you held and then pulled it up behind them, they will be the ones who bring your harvest to your doorstep. Not because they suddenly became generous, but because God will not let them sleep until they have repaid what they owe. I don't know how He will do it. I don't know when, but I know His character. I know His promises, and I know that He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. If you believe that your wasted years are being restored right now, I want you to do something. I want you to type in the comments, "My harvest is plentiful." Let the world know that you are not looking at the mirror anymore. You are looking at the harvest. You are not counting the years that are behind you. You are counting the blessings that are ahead of you. You are not listening to the whisper of the enemy that says, "You wasted your life." You are listening to the voice of the Father who says, "I am about to make your latter days greater than your former days." But I need you to do one more thing.
I need you to share this story with one person who feels like they have lost too much time. One woman who has poured herself out for others and has nothing left for herself. One man who sacrificed his dreams for his family and wonders if anyone remembers. Share it with them. Tell them your years are not wasted. Your restoration is coming. Because that is the power of testimony. When we share what God has done, we create a space for others to believe that He can do it for them too. But let me tell you about one more thing that happened in Naomi's journey. A thing that happened when no one was watching. After all the success, after the house, after the academy, after the world tours and the magazine covers, Naomi did something that surprised everyone who knew her. She went back to her old one-room apartment. It was abandoned now. The landlord had found someone else to rent it, but that person had moved out years ago. The paint was peeling even more. The window crack had become a gaping hole. The mattress with the springs poking through was still there, covered in dust and the droppings of rats. She sat on the floor. The same floor where she had wept until her throat was raw. The same floor where she had beat her fists against the cement and screamed at God. And for the first time in her life, she did not pray for someone else. She whispered, "Lord, I have the house, I have the name, I have the academy, the money, the success, but please give me back the girl I was before the world broke me. Give me back the joy that I buried under 30 years of sacrifice. Give me back the woman who dreamed, not just the woman who served." She sat there in the dust, in the silence, in the place where her heart had broken open, and she felt a warmth wrap around her like a blanket. It was not a warmth she could explain, not the heat of the sun, not the flush of emotion. It was a warmth that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world, a warmth that seeped into the cracks of her soul and began to heal things she didn't even know were broken. The bitterness she didn't know she was still holding, the resentment that had become so much a part of her she had stopped noticing it, simply melted away. The stinging memories of the years she had lost their sting.
The weight of the past lifted from her shoulders, and she felt lighter than she had felt since she was a child. She walked out of that old room, and she was not the same woman who had walked in. She was not the Naomah who had been broken by the world. She was not the Naomah who had been defined by her sacrifice. She was the Naomah who had been restored from the inside out, the Naomah who had been given back her joy, her hope, her laughter, her dreams. She had achieved the ultimate miracle, the restoration of the soul. From that day forward, Naomah became something more than a designer, more than a businesswoman, more than a philanthropist. She became a joy starter. She would walk into rooms of depressed, burnt-out women, women who had given everything to everyone and had nothing left for themselves, and simply by her presence, the atmosphere would change. They would look at her, at the glow in her skin, the light in her eyes, the laughter that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep inside her, and they would feel hope stirring in their own hearts. "How do you do it?" they would ask. "How do you stay so joyful after everything you've been through?" And she would smile and say, "I learned that the locusts didn't eat my years. They were just storing my harvest in a place I couldn't see. And when God decided it was time, He didn't just give me back what I lost. He gave me back who I was." She proved that when God restores you, He doesn't just fix your bank account. He fixes your internal clock. He gives you the strength of a youth and the wisdom of an elder at the same time. He makes you a living bridge between generations, a woman who has lived through the fire and come out smelling like roses. This is the end of Naomah's story, but it is the beginning of your testimony. Do not look at the calendar. Do not count the gray hairs in your head. Do not add up the years and calculate what you have lost. Look at the God who can make a dry bone live again. Look at the God who can make a desert bloom. Look at the God who can take the years the locusts have eaten and give them back to you in a single moment. He is the master of the clock. He is the redeemer of time. He is reaching into your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, and He is dragging all that stolen potential into your now. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. If you are ready to move from the small kitchen to the great palace, type in the comments, "God is the master architect." If you are ready to receive your double portion for every year you spent in the shadows, type "Restoration is my portion." And if you believe that your second half will be greater than your first half, type "My joy is restored." And if you are ready to see the Naomah miracle in your own life, if you are ready to stop looking at the mirror and start looking at the harvest, type "My years are redeemed." I want to pray for you before you go. Not the kind of prayer that sounds nice but doesn't change anything, but the kind of prayer that shifts things in the spiritual realm, the kind of prayer that breaks chains, the kind of prayer that opens doors that have been closed for decades. Father, I thank you for the person reading these words right now. I thank you that you have not forgotten them, that you have not abandoned them, that you have not looked away from their sacrifice and their service and their years of pouring out for others. I declare that the locusts are being evicted. Every year that was stolen, every dream that was buried in secret, every tear that was shed in secret, I declare that it is all coming back, not in trickles, but in floods, not in small measures, but in abundant harvest. I speak to the spirit of bitterness, and I command it to leave. I speak to the spirit of regret, and I command it to release its hold. I speak to the spirit of hopelessness, and I declare that it has no place in this life. Father, give them back the joy of their youth. Give them back the dreams they thought were dead. Give them back the years that the enemy thought he had stolen. I declare that their latter days will be greater than their former days. I declare that their restoration will be complete, body, soul, and spirit. I declare that they will not just survive, but thrive. They will not just be blessed, but become a blessing. Their name will be remembered, their legacy will endure, and their story will inspire generations. In the name of Jesus, who restores all things, I declare their wasted years are becoming their wealthy years. Amen. Now go. Go and live like someone whose harvest is coming. Go and smile like someone whose joy is restored. Go and dream like someone whose time has been redeemed. The years were not wasted. They were waiting. And the waiting is over.